private sector, started 3 companies and so forth, as well as being a world-class chemist. And he's talked about the entrepreneurial university. And part of the conversation was around how do we think about the commodification of knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And where do you draw the line? Because private industry treats knowledge in a different way than those of us who
I had big discussions at NSF on the investigator-driven research versus the program-driven.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, as we're finishing filling the seats here and coming in, we'll begin our festivities tonight with the ringing of the bell. That was an accident. It is my great pleasure to be here tonight to welcome you to this wonderful day, another of a series of activities commemorating the 50th anniversary of ISER. And the dignitaries who are here tonight are way too numerous to mention, but we are delighted to have ISER members from many years past, ISER directors, ISER faculty and staff here currently serving, faculty, supporters, and one thing we all share is an abiding respect for this wonderful organization celebrating its 50th anniversary. And you know, thank you. We have had a series of delightful 40th anniversary celebrations for a number of organizations, but ISER trumps it with a 50th anniversary. And it really speaks to the role that ISER has played over the many years of Alaska's experience to be the voice that Alaskans listen to, an unbiased source of so many things. And ISER has continued to grow, to get specialties that are of critical importance to Alaska. And I was delighted to start my university experience at UAA in the College of Business and Public Policy, where I had a very close relationship with ISER, and I'm equally delighted to be back to UAA to continue that relationship. So I'll tell you, this organization is absolutely amazing. Now, we are going to have a great panel discussion tonight that will be of real interest and importance to Alaska. And to continue the next part of our program tonight, I'd like to introduce Carla Beam, who is our University of Alaska Vice President for University Relations and the President of the UA Foundation. Carla?
Well, thank you. I joined Chancellor Case in being really excited to be here, and I can't wait to hear from this evening's panel. I'm here this evening. I'm representing President Gamble and the University of Alaska system statewide, as well as the University of Alaska Foundation. This is the beginning of my 8th week working in this job, so I'm brand new, but what's been amazing to me is how many celebrations I've been to in the last couple of weeks. And it's been really fun and really incredible. Chancellor Case mentioned there have been a number of 40th anniversary celebrations. 2 weeks ago here in Anchorage, there was a groundbreaking for the new sports arena. It was the 40th anniversary of the WWAMI program and the opening of the gorgeous new health sciences building. Last week I was up in Fairbanks, and I got to see the donation by my former employer, BP, of a $4.5 million wellhead that goes to the Process Tech program up there. And I got to see a $1 million donation from Sumitomo Pogo Mining Company. And that was in addition to another $1 million that they'd gotten about 2 weeks before, all of which came about as a result of the education tax credit, which has recently been expanded and extended by the legislature. So if there are any legislators out there this evening, I want to thank you for that. All of this tells me that we're really growing up and maturing as a university. And as I get older, I think there's nothing wrong with growing up, getting older, and maturing. There are a lot of good things that come with it. And tonight, you know, we're celebrating another milestone with the 50th anniversary of ISER. While I'm a newcomer to the university, I've been in the state for 35 years, and I've had so many occasions to witness the impact and utilize the information that's come from this really important institution. ISER was created by the legislature. I think that's significant. The fact that it's housed within the university, I think, is also significant. And I think the fact that it's supported by so many different corporations and organizations that represent so many different industries. And tonight I heard a wonderful nonprofit story of the impact that ISER had on their ability to bring in resources. So I really want to thank all those who had the vision to create ISER, those who have nurtured it along the way, many of whom are on this panel this evening, and all of you who have supported the important work that they're doing. So here's to another 50 years, and I hope everybody in this room is still with us in 50 years. Thank you.
That's some breakthrough research, and that's going to happen.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for coming. My name's Heather Hudson, and I'm the current director of ISER. I've only been here in this job since January of 2010, but I did work here in the 70s and saw many of the early developments in telecommunications and worked on them and worked on many other projects since then. So it's wonderful to be back. It's wonderful to welcome you. I'm still learning not only about ISER and UAA, but I learn from people who've been here and have great institutional memory. And one of the things I learned was there was a big plan to do a 25th anniversary celebration, but it didn't happen. And it didn't happen because that's when the volcano erupted, I understand. So we're fortunate that there's no major events, I think, weather events or others, to keep us from getting together. So
The evening's still young.
that's true, but at least we made it here. Whether you get home or not, that's a different question. We have many, many people and organizations to acknowledge who've made this event possible and who've made much of our research and activity possible. I'd like to start with recognizing our dean here, Bear Baker. Maybe you can stand up so people know, who's been a wonderful supporter of ISER and contributor to the planning of this and other events for ISER's 50th anniversary. We are part of the College of Business and Public Policy. Most of our faculty are affiliated with that college, and so he is our main link to the university, although we participate in many other ways, and a wonderful resource to have. So thank you, Bear, for all you've done and for supporting these activities. We have many other sponsors, too, that have helped make this event possible and contributed to some of ISER's research in the past. I'm going to just recognize them. Some are listed in your program, and others are listed on a big poster that we have of our donors in the back. I will tell you that and if you are a representative of that organization, when I call out your name, please stand. There's a reason to be recognized, so don't be shy, and that's that we do have a gift for you. And that gift depends on our founder here, Vic Fisher, who many of you may know as the co-director and co-founder and first director of ISER, who's working on a book of his memoirs. And he has said that all of these sponsors and major donors will get a bookmark which entitles them to a copy of the book when it's published, which will be next year. Now, this puts more than a little pressure on Vic, since I know, too, as having written books, that it's scary when you think I have a deadline and I have to get this thing done, and will it happen? And we're convinced that it will happen. I think he's convinced, too, but it's at that point when you're trying to get the last part together. So this is a real incentive for him as well as for others. So we'd like to recognize many different donors and sponsors, some in kind and some with financial support. Alaska Airlines made it possible to bring several of these people here, and we really appreciate Alaska Airlines' contribution to the university and to ISER to make that possible. We also are very pleased to have support from BP, who has contributed to support for this event and some of our activities. I think we have somebody from BP. If they come. We didn't promise them that if they didn't come in time, they wouldn't get. They didn't know what they were going to get, but we really appreciate the contribution of BP. Also, First National Bank, which has contributed to some support for this in our activities this year. And we have, Mary, we have a representative from First National Bank. So thank you very much for your support. Institute of the North has been a partner with us, and we were involved in co-sponsoring the Talkeetna Dialogues this weekend. And Ermelie Hickel was hoping to come, but she wasn't able to come. But I think Carol Anderson is here. Is that right, Carol? And so maybe you can tell Ermelie that she has something coming to her, and we love to involve her in our activities whenever she feels up to it. Also, the Pebble Partnership contributed to helping us with these activities, and I think John Shively is here somewhere. There he is. Thank you so much. We've also had several recent supporters providing significant funding for our research activity and taking advantage of the education tax credit, which I think you'll hear a bit more later on if you don't know about already, and I hope those of you from corporations from the private sector here have heard about it. The Council of Alaska Producers, and I think Mike Sartre is here. Is he still here, or did he have to leave? He had to leave. Anyway, they have funded support for Bob Leffler to be a visiting faculty member with us and to teach about natural resources and do research. And it's a wonderful program, and we're really delighted to have them involved. I think John Shiley is certainly a member of that organization as well. So thank you so much to them. Also, Icicle Seafoods and Chris Noros is here. Thank you so much. They have funded much of Gunnar Knapp's work on fisheries with significant underwriting, and many of you know Gunnar, who's sitting beside her. And also Northrim Bank, and I think Mark Edwards is here. Is that right? Thank you. And Northrim has been a very major contributor and underwriter of much of the recent economic analysis and scenarios for Alaska's future that Scott Goldsmith has done. Scott's up here with the hat of previous director on, but you may probably know him for much of his research activity. There are others who have contributed. ConocoPhillips, I think Scott Jepson is here. Is that right? And Mary Gibbs. And they have also been supporters of ISER activity and foundations. And certainly you heard from Carla from the University of Alaska Foundation, and they have been major helpers in helping us to both through direct support and helping us to contact and develop relationships with other supporters. So thank you again to Carla for that. One of the early supporters was ARCO, and you may hear more about this later on from Scott Goldsmith and Lee Gorsuch, who thought that an analysis of the state's fiscal situation was critical because the North Slope was starting its long decline. This was in the 1980s. And Hank Rosenthal at ARCO agreed that the work was important and was willing to persuade others at ARCO that ISER could do that job. And I think Heather Flynn is here representing Hank Rosenthal, who was the one who said, yeah, we can help with that. So thank you so much for helping us to get the private sector involved. We have many others, donors and supporters, and they're all listed on a poster at the back, but just to mention several of them, GCI has supported us with a telecom symposium earlier this year. We've received support from Wells Fargo, from NANA in the past, from Tech Cominco, the Rasmussen Foundation, the Harold A. Pomeroy Foundation, and other foundations that I need my other piece of paper for. The Harold E. Pomeroy Public Policy Research Endowment, the Anna E. Casey Foundation, the Alaska Humanities Forum, Children's Hospital at Providence, Kids Count, which is an organization that helps produce Kids Count, the information on demographics and youth across the country and youth in Alaska, which is headed by Virgin Hanna. So we would like to thank all of those and also our individual donors who've really contributed to helping us make possible to do the work that we do. So thank you to all of our contributors. And I'd also like to recognize the many contributors of enormous time and effort, the ISER staff who've worked on this event and other events during the year, but particularly this one. A lot of the ideas for what we would do tonight and how we would do it came from them. Certainly all the activity of putting things together, what you see and what's available to you, came from the staff at ISER. So please, I'd like you to thank everybody here and meet as many of them as possible as you can during the evening. So thank you very much, everybody. You will see on the side some material about ISER. There are publications. There's a video loop of some interesting historical references to ISER's work that goes back to the late 1960s, early 1970s. You may see some articles that sound familiar in terms of the future of the petroleum industry, the decline of the petroleum industry, the problems with education, health problems, native issues. What goes around comes around, but there's been a lot of progress in many of those. So feel free to browse those materials if you haven't already during the time after this panel. Also, many of those materials are available on our website, or if you'd like a copy of something and you don't see it there, or you'd like more than there is there, please just let us know. This is what we're here for, is to provide information that we hope is of interest to you and the organizations, people that you work with. So please feel free, and also let us know if there's other material topics we should be working on, and that's one of the focuses we're going to look at now, or if there's other ways you think we can reach out to your colleagues, your constituents, younger people, people in rural communities. We really want to try to do that, and we're looking for suggestions and ideas of how to do that better. I'd like to turn now to the panel discussion, and we're really very fortunate to have here directors who go back to the beginning of ISER all the way to the present. You will see, unfortunately, that we are missing a couple of people, and someone asked you about this, so I'll mention those before introducing these people. Jack Cruz, who many of you know from his work over a long period of time in Alaska and on the Arctic, wasn't able to come. He's in Europe, and said, well, I'm going to be in Europe, and he made that decision long ago. So we miss him, but I know that many of you remember his work. Also Steve Colt, who is on the faculty still, an economist working largely on, significantly on environment and climate change issues and energy issues, had some long-standing commitments and couldn't be with us tonight, but he's very much still a very active part of our faculty, and was acting director for several years after Fran and before I came. So you should think about them as being part of this discussion. I'd like to introduce the people briefly. I know, and I've learned since I came to Alaska, everybody kind of knows everybody either directly or through half a degree of separation. But a few of you may not know some of these people or may not have seen them for a long time. So in the center we have Vic Fisher, our author, as well as ISER's first director. He studied and taken part in Alaska government and politics, as you know, for over 50 years. Many of you might have seen him in the documentary on the Constitution. He was a territorial legislator, a delegate to Alaska's Constitutional Convention, a state senator, still involved in state policy, local government, Alaska-Russia issues, and something I didn't know until recently, that in 2006 Vic received an honorary Doctor of Laws degree, so I should have been calling him Dr. Fisher all this time. We're so glad to have you. I've learned so much from him, and his energy and commitment is truly amazing. So thanks, Vic, for helping us to get started. Our other directors, Lee Gorsuch, who's currently president of City University of Seattle, and came here as a faculty member, and then became a director of ISER for a long period, as you can see there, for 1976 to 2004. That's the longest term, I think, of a director, and it's amazing that he's been today helping us think through our strategy for the future. After that, he became chancellor, so you might have seen him here in that role for 10 years from 1994 to 2004. He has a wealth of knowledge and background, education, public policy, science, outreach to the community, and it's great to have him back with us. Bill McDermott, who you'll see to my right of Lee, to your, if you have trouble reading the program or reading the signs, he's currently dean and alumni, distinguished professor of education at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He served on the faculties both at UAF and UAA and Michigan State, then was lured back to Alaska and was director of ISER from 1997 to 2001. So he had a long period here, and then he was director. Before returning to North Carolina, where he had gone to school and where he had grown up, he was the Boeing Professor of Teacher Education at the University of Washington. So we're really delighted to have him back from North Carolina. Second from the end down there is Tom Morehouse, who was a professor of political science at ISER from 1968 until 1994. That's a long stretch, too. And was acting ISER director in 1985-86. So we have lots of institutional memory here. He was one of ISER's first faculty members, and he's edited and co-written several books, including Alaska's Urban and Rural Governments, Dynamics of Alaska Native Self-Government, Alaska Politics and Government, a lot of papers as well while he was here. And is now based in Portland. So, I'm sorry, I keep saying that, and I mean to think. He flew from Portland. Salem. He's living in Salem, Oregon. So we're delighted to have him back as well. To Tom's right, your left, is Scott Goldsmith, who's been a public policy researcher at ISER since 1975. And who also served a term as director starting in 2001. He's involved in much of the analysis and many of the discussions that you see in papers on the Alaska economy, fiscal, economic issues, which we'll hear a bit more about tonight for sure, energy and natural resource economic issues. You often would hear him quoted or interviewed in the newspaper and in the media in Alaska. He testifies frequently at the legislature, produces materials that are not only incredibly insightful, but actually interesting and accessible to the public, to the general public. See, I wasn't going to use the word dismal science, which economists talk about each other. But it's a great skill to not only have the economic expertise that Scott has, be able to apply it and be able to translate and communicate it to a broad audience. So we're really delighted to still have Scott with us at ISER. And in the green, someone I'm sure you all know in one role or another, Fran Ulmer, who's currently chair of the Arctic Research Commission, and she will be doing that for the next 4 years. So she's wearing that hat, or maybe that color. She's still wearing her UAA green because she served as the chancellor and just passed the baton to Tom this spring. In the meantime, last year, while being chancellor, she was one of the 7 members of the National Commission on the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill, and you probably have heard her interviewed or seen some of the material that she's written about that. She's a tremendous resource on the Arctic as well as on now on oil spills as well. But she's had many other roles in the state, and I'm sure many of you know that. She served in elective office for 18 years, mayor of Juneau, a state representative, and then lieutenant governor. And she asked when she was passing the torch to Tom whether she could come back and be based at ISER, and we said of course. So we're delighted to have Fran as a senior fellow with us for as much of her time as she can spare. So thank you. Okay, so now to turn to hearing from them. There is a reason for this bell. I hope I don't have to use it, but I might. I have learned that these people are not only incredibly knowledgeable, have a tremendous wealth of background, but they're very verbal as well, and that's good. But I think eventually you might want some champagne and cake, so I will try to keep them in line if I have to do that. What I thought we would address is look at 3 different issues and give each person a chance to say a bit about each of them, where we've been, where we're going in the state, and what the role of ISER and perhaps more broadly the University of Alaska Anchorage and UA in general might be in addressing some of these questions. So in terms of where we've been, the question is, what are the most significant changes you see, either coming back to Alaska or if you've been here, reflecting on when you first came to Alaska? And I thought what I would do was take the people in the order, I think, of when they first came, not when they were first directors as I introduced them, but when they first came to Alaska. And certainly Vic Fisher still plays the role of being here, I think, the longest and having the longest continuous memory about Alaska. So can you summarize in a couple of minutes, Vic, and we'll read the rest in the book? What jumps out at you, and then we'll look afterwards at where we go next.
The answer is no. I cannot summarize it in 3 minutes.
Say what you like in 3.
But you know, a politician, you ask a politician any question you want, and they'll give you the answer that they want to give you in the first place, regardless of your question. I want to make it real clear that the creator, the initiator of ISER, was George Rogers, who died last year. George came to Alaska in 1944 as an advisor to the Governor Ernest Greening. He worked with Ernest Greening as an economic advisor. He worked with Frank Heinzelman, who was governor after Greening. And George, 2 years after Alaska became a state in 1961, initiated the legislation that created ISER. And the thing that, sort of to tie in with the theme, a thing that I remember real well is after coming to Alaska almost as a kid 61 years ago, I had the pleasure of meeting George and a number of other people who were creative, who were thinking about Alaska already. And George and Dick Cooley and economist Hans Jensen sponsored this legislation. And George was in Juneau, and I remember being in Juneau at the time. He walked the halls of the legislature, and he got the legislation through because in 1961, we knew that in order for Alaska to be a real state, there had to be a foundation, and a foundation had to be in knowledge and understanding of the economy, demography, and everything else. And that's how the Institute was born. And it was George Rogers, and I'm called a co-director, the co-sponsor, co-creator of ISER. I came after George, and I want him to get full credit here. George also was the father and grandfather figure of the Institute for many, many years, I think during Lee Gorsuch's time. And I came along in 1966, 5 years after legislation was enacted. I was the first director, and I could go on for 30 minutes about the early days, but we had many accomplishments. We were known as the Institute of Everything, and one of the great achievements that I can take credit for is that during my tenure, we brought on board Scott Goldsmith, Tom Morehouse, and Lee Gorsuch as my successors. So those are my achievements.
Thank you so much. that set the stage wonderfully, and we certainly, I really appreciate your comments about George Rogers and his contribution, and we will come back to discussing his legacy at the end of the panel. I think next, in terms of not time necessarily with ISER, but being in Alaska and on the faculty, is Tom. I think from 1968 you first came, is that right?
Yes.
So what jumps out at you? And I understand you may interpret the question any way you see fit.
Now I have to think. I first visited in 67 and just before the Fairbanks flood, and then I came in 68 permanently, just at the time that Prudhoe Bay discovery was announced. But it took several years, as you all know, before the Prudhoe Bay reservoir was developed and pipeline built, etc. So during that first several years that I was here, Alaska was a much simpler, smaller place. Smaller, not just in terms of population, but in terms of the kind of community life, the friends and neighbors politics, as well as the friends and neighbors over the fence kind of atmosphere, both in Fairbanks and in Anchorage. At the time, the native claims movement was just getting underway. Actually, it was in its early years, and it was the first sign that things were going to be changing, as they well should. But many of the changes that occurred were not anything that Alaskans had much control over. I mean, in first place, the Prudhoe Bay discovery, or after that, the huge amounts of revenues that flowed into the state, both in the public and private economy, as a result of the ups and usually ups of oil prices, and the production, which was tremendous, as you all know too, in those early days, and right on through the 80s, into the 80s. So things changed, absolutely changed. I left that idealized version of the small community Alaska in the past. As I came back this time, coming in from the airport, and driving down the International Airport Way and up C Street and so on, and seeing all of the development, all of the buildings, all of the infrastructure, everything that has happened, everything had changed. My wife and I went to Costco the other day to pick some stuff up. Twice as big, twice as busy, twice as many cars as in little old Salem back there, which is about the same size. This is a booming, different place. It's more complex. It's more interesting.
Thank you. I think next in terms of arrival is Fran. Fran, I think you said 73? You first arrived here, so as you choose as you like to think what jumps out at you from experience from the past to now.
Alaskans were still paying a personal income tax. I know that seems like a strange thing to say, but it was different in that Alaskans actually saw paying taxes as a way of expressing their support for community, their definition of patriotism. Because we were more of a place where people had to help each other, had to pull together. You couldn't really rely on a check from government. You couldn't rely on oil paying everything. People had to make choices about what was really important for city government or state government to do. So the relationship between people and their government, and people and their community, their neighborhoods, and people and each other. You were a long way away from home, wherever you grew up. You were a long way away from the support structures that you had come to know, whether you were from Wisconsin as I was or from some other place. So you created this bond with your neighbors, with the teachers, with the churches, that yes, you can still find in places in Alaska. I'm not saying it's not here. It was just more intense. And I suspect that's why people say that the friendships that they made in Alaska in the 70s and probably in the 60s and 50s and maybe even in the 80s had an intensity that's different than the relationships that people make today. So by contrast, I would just say that the sense of self-reliance and commitment to community it felt different than it feels now. That's not to say that there aren't a whole lot of wonderful people and wonderful institutions that try to create that sense of community and that sense of civic engagement and patriotism defined writ large, but it has a different feel. So when I think about the differences, obviously the wealth that came to this state as a result of oil has been phenomenal in terms of what it has purchased for us in the roads and the bridges and the airports and the schools and the hospitals and the trails and all kinds of things that have added greatly to our quality of life. But I am slightly nostalgic for that time when we were more self and community, self-reliant and community interdependent. And I have to ask, is there a way that we can rebuild that in Alaska?
Okay, thank you. I think next in terms of arriving was Scott. Is that right? 1975. He said 76.
What about Gorsuch?
He's next. You're
No,
next.
actually, I preceded Fran.
I thought 76 you said, so.
I joined the Institute in 1976, but I came to Alaska in 1971.
All right. Pick up the baton.
First, like Vic, I want to sort of publicly thank Victor for hand-picking me to be his successor. He circumvented almost all university policies and procedures associated with finding a new director for ISER, and he managed to manipulate the capital improvement process, so we moved from the College Village grocery store to the 9th floor of the Greening Building, the loveliest building on the Fairbanks campus. So, Victor, thank you very much. And I say that in all sincerity. As I look back, one thing I feel that I'm most impressed with is Alaska and Anchorage is now investing in the human capital that UAA is now producing. For a long period of time, we sent most of our college-bound high school students to the lower 48, and we knew that when they left, there was a low probability of their returning. That fortune has now been changed so that over 2/3 of the high school students who are college-bound now stay in the state of Alaska, and by far that is our richest natural resource, is the young people who grow up and study here in Alaska. So I'm enormously proud of that.
Thank you.
The second thing I notice is that with one brief episode of a former governor running for vice president, Alaska is no longer on the national scene. During the 40 years I was here, it was truly phenomenal. The Alaska Native Land Claims Settlement Act, ANILCA, you could run through a litany of important national issues where Alaska was clearly front and center. We were producing 25% of the country's natural oil reserves and oil production. That's now diminished down to 600,000 barrels a day. We're no longer on the national agenda. So it's now up to Alaska to figure out what it wants to do with itself. Now that the land issues have been resolved, now that the settlement of the land claims has been resolved, now that we have our parks and our recreational areas established, and now that that sort of gusher from Prudhoe Bay is now on the decline, is truly a moment for serious reflection about where we go from here. I'm impressed by the success of the Alaska Native corporations that have now become a phenomenal economic source of influence and employment for the state of Alaska. that's certainly something that everyone should feel quite proud of. They now have more of a voice than they did when I first arrived. I think that's to everyone's credit who supported that important piece of legislation and helped in its implementation. But I'd also have to say that the more things change, the more they remain the same. We still have some very serious impacted educational challenges, especially in rural Alaska, where our fastest growing segment of the Alaska population continue to experience significant academic achievement gaps. We have yet to figure out how to provide a quality educational experience for many young people who will become the future of Alaska, and I think that remains to be a significant issue. A second one is we don't know how to get back to any sense of stability where we actually pay for some of the goods and services that we receive. This is a huge disconnect in terms of any government anywhere in the world, that somehow you expect state services as an entitlement, but you don't pay for them. I don't know what the answer to that is, but it is a vexing problem that spells trouble for Alaska, that if it does not come to terms with this, it's only by the good fortunes of another discovery of oil that has this phenomenal capacity to bring enormous wealth to the state. So in many ways, the agenda that a lot of us are dedicated to remains to be resolved. I'm personally just absolutely delighted to have been a part of such a wonderful community that ISER has been, and wanted to thank all the faculty, staff, and others who've supported the Institute over this 50 years. It's been a wonderful experience for me and all my colleagues with whom I've worked. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Scott.
Sorry. Let me first say that I'm just delighted to see all the Friends of ISER faces out in the audience. Looking around, I can't say that I recognize quite everybody. Maybe it's because I'm getting along on the tooth, but there's so many memories that just seeing these faces brings back. So it's a delight for me to see you all here tonight. Secondly, let me say that I never sought the position of director of ISER, which I think may make me unique among this august group. Oh, sorry. And as soon as I became the director, I started looking for ways that I could become the undirector. And Vic talked about his accomplishments as director. I'd have to say that my greatest accomplishment as director was to become the undirector in favor of Fran Ulmer here, who had an illustrious career before ISER and went on to continue her illustrious career. Hopefully we'll be back at ISER tomorrow. In thinking about this question, what's the most significant change you see coming back to Alaska? Well, I've been here in Alaska for 35 years. The most significant change I see is when I look in the mirror in the morning after I get up. Particularly when I compare that picture to some of these photographs that I see here displayed tonight that show how much hair I had 35 years ago. Not that the loss of that hair had anything to do with being a member of ISER, but what it demonstrates is many things, actually. One is I was just calculating the institutional memory that we have on the stage here today. It averages about 40 years. So we're looking at about 280 years worth of institutional memory, if not 300. Probably 300 if we count all of Vic's years. Not alone. Although sometimes we wonder about that. And of course, as a state, we're older. The average age of the population has increased. But that aging of the population, just saying that the average person is older, is not really what what is significant about that phenomenon. What's significant is that there have been several younger generations come along during my tenure at ISER, and each succeeding generation is very different from those that have come before. And each succeeding generation has their own ideas about what Alaska is, what's important for Alaska, and what's important for them. Keeping track of that is a challenge. It's a continuing challenge. Just this last weekend, I learned a new word. And that word is trustafarian. Is there anyone in the audience who knows the definition of trustafarian?
Karen?
All right, Karen, you are with it. A trustafarian is a new age trust fund baby. It's a trust fund baby that's kind of hip. And I hear that Girdwood is heavily populated by these trustafarians. Okay. Well, I had no idea. But it reminds me that the Alaska landscape is constantly changing, even though we have these underlying problems that we think are and have been challenges for 30, 40, 50 years. The population is changing. It's not only getting diverse, we're getting these trustafarians and other diverse groups that are just as Alaskan as those of us up here, but they're different from the generation of Alaskans that I came to Alaska with, which were the baby boomers, who thought they were going to stay for 2 or 3 years, ride the pipeline boom, and then leave. And lo and behold, most of us have stuck around, and we're still here, and we'll probably continue to be here for the foreseeable future. Just a couple other things quickly. When I first came to ISER, it was ISER, I-S-E-G-R. Then it was ISER, and now under our new director, it's ISER. So I just want everybody to make sure they understand.
I didn't know. I thought I was saying ISER. Okay.
That's all right. That's all right. And then the other thing I would just mention is that I was looking at some of the reports that I put out when I first started tackling the question of Alaska's state finances. And in fact, the first fiscal policy paper. That first fiscal policy paper was 24 pages long. And I'll bet there were actually people who read that thing. Well, if you were to do a 24-page paper today, nobody would even look at it. The most recent paper that I did was 4 pages long. And that is a reflection of the fact that I said, well,
his thinking's much clearer now than it was then.
Well, the trustafarians are not likely to be reading as much. After 25 years, we've figured out how to say the message a little bit more succinctly. And I think we're going to continue moving in that direction because over the weekend, in fact, we were thinking about bumper stickers. Mm-hmm. And that may be the future direction for ISER publications. One of the bumper stickers that I thought of was representation without taxation, the Alaskan way.
Okay. Thank you. And Bill.
So my journey was a bit different than other folks. I actually came to Alaska as a research associate at ISER when Judy Kleinfeld and Jack Cruz still had the sort of rump portion of ISER in Fairbanks, and a lot of my first 3 years at ISER was spent in rural Alaska, and Judy and I had a project studying, this was in 1982, studying the new rural high schools. The legislature at that point was very curious about whether or not these expensive high schools was worth the nickel. I also was involved in a research project with Jerry Macbeth looking at how the schools were governed. And I had a particular interest in how the local school boards were dealing with the schools and sort of what role they actually played in governing the schools. So my entry into Alaska was largely through my experiences in a whole range of villages, from False Pass to Anaktuvuk to southeast and Delta down to Tok, I think it profoundly shaped the way that I saw things. And in particular, I ended up being closely connected with the village of Chivak. And in fact, I was out there the year that the tribal council took control of their school and became the first K-12 school in the nation to be run by the tribal council, by the traditional council. And they actually, Peter Tuluk was the liaison between the feds and the traditional council, most of whom were these wonderful elders who had amazing vision, but who didn't necessarily speak English or something, but they could count on Peter to be able to read these voluminous federal regulations and help them figure out how to do this. And I think that experience in Chivak, and I continued to have and continue to this day to have various projects and still connected to that place and to the people there. And I think that when I think about this question about how things have changed and so forth, I think about that in relation to Chivak. And when I first lived in Chivak, the only time you ever heard English was in the school and sometimes in church, right? Even part of the service was in Chupik. And now when I go to the village, one of the things that they're trying to do is create an immersion program in their elementary school to try and preserve what remnant of the language there is still there. And that's a huge blow. It's a huge blow, especially for the elders who are still around and feared that this would happen. And I remember a meeting in the gym. This was like the beginning of the school year, and everybody in the village came. And the question that Peter Tuluk posed to the folks was, what do you want out of the school? And it was very interesting because Peter sort of orchestrated this process with them, and they came, and the primary goal ended up being a tie. And the two things that they said was, we want our kids to be able to read as well as the kids in Anchorage, and we want them to grow up to understand what it means to be a Chupik human being. And when I talk to the elders now, and when I talk to people like Jampingak, who was I taught with and have done a lot of things with subsequently, I think there's a feeling that we failed in both regards. And a lot of the gap that I think Lee referred to in academic performance is a result of our inability to figure out how we muster the resources that are there and turn them toward how we help rural youth develop both the skills they need to operate in a Western culture, as well as the grounding they absolutely have to have in who they are as people, and in the case of the Chupik people, the people of the tundra. So when I think again about changes, continuities, discontinuities, that's the one that stands out for me.
Thank you. Well, some have mentioned already issues that you think we're going to face, but I want to give you an opportunity to talk about a little bit where you think, where the state is going, what challenges you see facing Alaska, either if you want to extend your horizon out as far as 50 years since ISER's been around, or a shorter term horizon. And I think we'll start and we'll work down the panel in this direction, and then we'll work back up on the last question. And start with Scott. And I will tell you that his 4-pager is available back there. And should you not want to pick it up now but be interested, it's also on our website. And it was very well received at the meeting we were at Talkeetna on Alaskan challenges. So, Scott, what are we facing?
Alaska and Alaskans have been incredibly blessed over the last 50 years since Alaska became a state with the wealth from oil as well as the other natural assets that Alaska has to offer, but particularly petroleum, because petroleum generates not only jobs and business opportunities, but incredible wealth. Since statehood, the state has been the recipient of about $150 billion, if you put the taxes in and royalties in today's dollars. We have managed that, I think, fairly well. We put nearly a quarter of it into various savings accounts. Today we have about $55 billion in these savings accounts. And we still have a lot of oil in the ground that's worth a lot of money to the state when it will be produced. So if you add together what we have in the bank and the oil that's still in the ground, we may be looking at $150 billion worth of assets that we hold communally. Translate that into the fact that there's less than 800,000 of us. That's about $200,000 per capita. I think the most important question for the state moving forward, as it has been in the past, is how are we going to manage that wealth, both getting the remaining oil out of the ground and the income that is generated from our financial assets that we create by changing some of that oil revenue into a sustainable financial asset. How we manage that financial asset for the well-being of not only this generation of Alaskans, but also for those trustafarians out there in Girdwood, the next generation of Alaskans, or what we will now be calling the post-Prudhoe generation.
All right, thank you. Yeah, Tom. Yes, please.
I'll just say in one word what Scott just said in substance, and an important substance, and that is sustainability. Sustainability. 2 words, actually. Yeah.
50 years is hard for us to see. It's very hard for us to see sometimes next year, or a 5-year horizon, or a 10-year horizon. But to try to imagine what the next 50 years looks like really gets us into a zone of feeling as though we're not competent to do that. And so when you talk about the longer-term view of what's facing Alaska, this may sound a little out there, but I think there will be a flood of people to Alaska escaping from places that they cannot live any longer because of climate change. I think the extraordinary impacts that climate change will have in terms of creating deserts, of places that currently are productive agricultural zones. The water shortage issues are going to be intense. The rise of sea level, which is inevitable given the rate that Greenland and other areas are already signaling way beyond what the climate science modelers are predicting. The melt rate is far in excess of what even the most aggressive modelers have predicted. So the sea level rise in places like, Florida, New Orleans, not to mention low-lying areas throughout the world and some areas of Alaska. I just think it's hard for us to get our heads around the change that the next generation of Americans will experience because of the people that will come to northern areas where there will be water, hopefully, where there will be the opportunity for agriculture, hopefully, where there will still be a livable climate because of temperatures and less of the extreme storms, hopefully. I don't know. When I think about my grandson, who is age 2, and the churn, the political churn that will happen internationally as a result of what I can see, to the extent I can see, the impacts of climate change, I really worry, really worry. I mean, it's not something that we feel comfortable even talking about because we happen to live in a time in America when science is discredited, where science literacy is at an all-time low, when polling in America suggests that there are actually more and more people who distrust what scientists say, think of it as being outside of their capacity to fully understand, and they don't trust it, and they think it's political, and they don't really believe in climate change. To me, that's sort of like saying you don't believe in gravity. But the next 50 years, I think, will be very challenging worldwide. But I do believe that, given at least what I know now, that there will be a lot of people that will choose to live further north. And I think they will choose to live in portions of Alaska. And I don't know that we are planning for what I think could be a rather interesting set of increased diversity and increased pressures on those areas that have the sufficient water, temperature, and social infrastructure to make the communities be viable places for the influx of population. So that's way out there beyond the next 5 years, but I think it's food for thought, what we are doing today that might better position the state for that kind of a future.
Thank you. Vic.
I was going to say amen to sustainability. What Fran said makes that even more difficult than it is with the disconnect that we have between the present mindset of the population and the body politic with the reality that stares at us in the future. Fran's comment reminds me of the Brookings seminars that were held in 1969 after the Prudhoe Bay discovery and the big oily sale when we got $900 million in bonus bids, and leadership, intelligent of Alaskans were brought together, more than 100, or about 100 people, and worked a total of probably 15 days on issues of, okay, we're going to be rich, things are going to change big, and what are we going to do about it? And the first response was, let's build a fence around Alaska so we can enjoy what we have. Well, my first response to what Fran is saying, how do we protect what Alaska is to those of us and to our kids who are already born and the grandkids for many of us? And my pre-Fran thought was, well, we've got to change the mindset. We've got to have civic education and lots of others. At this point, Fran, I don't know what the answer is. I truly hadn't thought of this, except one flash ahead was Canada is north of the 48 lower states of the Union, and maybe most of the population will move into Canada.
They have better health care.
Well, I can tell you that the Canadians themselves like to cram into the northwest corner around Vancouver because they consider it to be the climatically most appealing. We'll see if that changes. So many of them live there, and others tend to gravitate there as well. Bill.
So when I think about the future and where Alaska should place its bets, and when I think about what's the most sustainable resource we have, it's our people. Some of us were part of this conversation, and some of you were part of the conversation out at Talkeetna. And I was struck by how much of the conversation was about investing revenues into, sustainable, various sustainable activities. And there was very little conversation about investing more in our human resources and what that would look like. And it does seem like to me that another aspect of that is arguably a major issue when you think about education in the state is the historic maldistribution of educational resources in the state, and who gets the best educational resources, and who gets the educational resources that are going to enable the post-Prudhoe generation to innovate its way out of the mess that we've created. And that's what it's going to take. None of us could have foreseen even 15 years ago Google and Facebook and Twitter and so forth. And it is the post-Prudhoe generation that is coming up with these new ways of connecting and new ways of coming up with solutions. One of my favorite experiments that over the last few years is a guy in London who studies kids' use of technology. And he just gave a group of kids in South London, they were mostly immigrant kids, he just gave them iPods and watched what they did with them. And the results of that were pretty amazing because the iPods became the way not only that they communicated, but the way they problem solved. And they used the iPods in conjunction with YouTube, like email is like so yesterday to these kids, right? And what they ended up doing was collaborating in ways that you would not have predicted. Collaborating not only on schoolwork, but collaborating around social things that they wanted to get done. So, if I could place a bet, I would place a bet on our kids and giving our kids the best possible education we can come up with. So.
Thank you. Lee, you've already mentioned some challenges. If you'd like to elaborate on that, and then begin the discussion of what could the role of ISER and perhaps the university more broadly be in addressing some of these challenges?
Uncertainty is probably our biggest challenge. The world, I think, is increasingly uncertain. So in the face of uncertainty, what do you do that doesn't wind up basically turning you into a catatonic? So I think this issue, in part, when I went to president's school, Derek Bach had said, well, if I could give you guys, all new presidents of universities, any advice, I would say don't overemphasize the vision thing, nor underestimate the importance of doing small things well. I think there's some actually sage advice that if you think too far about the future in terms of what it's going to hold and distract your attentions from learning how to do better the things that need to be done today, then you could wind yourself in a little bit of a pickle because the future is very uncertain. So my sense of our challenge as a society and here in Alaska is to get better at doing the things that we ought to be doing. whether it's in education, whether it's in finance, whether it's in resource development and so forth, is simply pay attention at the tasks at hand. The second is, I was going to open up with my comment of ni hao. There are plate tectonics occurring economically and culturally. So I don't know how many of you had the chance to visit to China or to India in the last 10 years, the last 20 years. This is a significant change that will alter the world. If we have no idea of Chinese culture, of Indian culture, we don't have any idea of what the future is going to be in 50 years, because they will be a big player in what that future looks like. So I would think all of us, not just in Alaska, but in the United States of America, we need to become more aware of these significant shifts that are occurring, and get off of this thing that we don't care how they do it on the outside, or that the United States knows how to do it best, or that we're the wealthiest and the most important and can afford to ignore how other people are approaching the challenges that they face. So uncertainty, learning how to do small things well, and open your eyes to Asia would be my suggestion of 3 opportunities, not simply challenges, to equip ourselves and our children and grandchildren to be an active participant in the second half of the 21st century.
And to follow up, are there any specific suggestions you have about either what ISER or the university could contribute to those or other opportunities that you've seen?
Well, I do think we had this conversation at lunch today on the strategy for ISER, and we have a diversity of opinion, which is very uncommon in the academic community. But my sense is that Alaska faces the continued problem of the management of the commons, and that everybody owns things, nobody owns them, no one's responsible, and we need to be thinking about policies that actually embrace ways in which these common ownership issues can be more successfully resolved. Tom's comment about sustainability, I think there are some significant opportunities for us to look at ways in which we can approach our strategies toward development in a far more sophisticated way that does build a sustainable foundation and takes Scott's proposition that if we have a $150 billion asset base, how could we convert that into a sustainable, take your 5% yield off of the $150 billion, 10% is $15 billion, 5% is $7.5 billion. Could Alaska function on $7.5 billion if we had the foresight of converting that $150 billion in a sustainable way? So I think that's another significant opportunity. I do think we have to double down on the educational commitment. I mean, what Bill had said about rural education, it is also true in our urban schools. For the United States as a whole, our young Hispanic American population is falling well behind, and yet our Social Security system is dependent upon the future workers. Guess what? 40% of them are going to be Hispanic Americans, and if they're not well educated, the entire country is going to be in jeopardy because of our inability to figure out how to help those young people become successful. So I can't overemphasize the importance. In 1981, I got really pumped about this report that came out called The Nation at Risk. Mm-hmm. And, basically the author said if there were a foreign power to attack the United States of America, it would not be as threatening as is the performance of our public schools and our commitment to the educational achievement of our children. And it's sad to say that here I am sitting 30 years later, and we're facing exactly the same challenge. We have not made substantial progress, and shame on us. I think the Institute can play, but I also think in order to do that, we may have to become a little more proactive in the policy development process and not limit ourselves to the policy analysis process.
Thank you. Bill, any thoughts for us about ISER or the university?
Well, this mostly follows on what Lee was saying. It does seem like to me that, and ISER's done this, and I think other folks in the university have done this, and that is in order to bring about the kind of improvement and learning opportunities for students that we need a much closer collaboration. Collaboration between the university and communities, the universities and schools, the universities and other entities, whether they are private industry, they're nonprofits, what have you. And it does seem like to me, and with internally, we also have a problem in the sort of disciplinary boundaries that we've staked out, which prevent us from bringing together folks from a range of areas in order to really focus in on what the issues are. So when I think about what the university can do, I think that the university can take the lead in helping to bring about these kind of collaborations and not sort of wait for, you know, someone else to initiate them and come get us. So.
And Bill, if I could just comment, one of my frustrations now are in my current capacity, we're one of the state of Washington's leading provider of teachers, and we do, I think, a fairly good job in teacher preparation. Our teachers tell us when they go to the school, they don't get a chance to practice what they've just been taught as to how to be an effective teacher. There's something wrong that doesn't allow us to make those kind of reforms. And the challenge that I think we're facing as a school of education in Washington, and I don't know if Bill wants to talk about this as it relates to North Carolina, we have to be part of the solution. Preparing teachers is not a sufficient condition to bring about the kind of changes that allows students to achieve. We have to become part of the school reform effort if we're going to be successful. So again, it takes us out of the comfort zone of saying, oh, we don't, our job isn't the performance of kids in schools, our job is to prepare teachers who then carry that torch. But if they're not successful because of the institutional barriers inside how we organize education, deliver education, we've got to step forward or we're going to be in the same track over and over again.
Vic, what would do you have any thoughts about what ISER or the university more broadly should be focusing on or could do?
Well, I'm thinking in terms of ISER, and I made a comment earlier that we used to be the Institute of Everything, and that was it was not a derogatory term, it was a very positive aspect of ISER, because there was a great variety of disciplines, people with different ideas, but all having a very intelligent discourse. And I am energized by having the ex-directors together, because we have had a very stimulating set of conversations. And I think that what we need to think in terms of what the Institute can do in the future requires this kind of a multifaceted group approach. Even though we each may have our own discipline, we may all come from different directions. It's the intermingling of bright people who come together and are creative and deal with issues that are or should be of public concern. So I think education is the foundation, but I also think that it's the intellectual discourse that the Institute needs to pursue as well.
Thank you. Fran.
So we're almost out of time.
Right.
So I'm going to take my 3 minutes on this topic and switch it a little bit and say that I think the Institute of Social and Economic Research does a tremendous service for the state of Alaska to both the public sector and the private sector in providing not just data and information, but analysis and understanding in a way that really helps improve decision making. Now, if you agree with that, and I know looking at this audience that many of you have used ISER materials over the years, you've contributed, you've been part of our research teams, you can help ISER take the next step that it needs to take to not only do what it's done in the past, but do that at a whole nother level by doing a couple of things. Number one, by sharing the information that you get about ISER research products with other people. Janie Leesk is here. She always laughs at me because I'm always handing out ISER materials. But you can help that. You can spread the products and help other people understand that, you know, you don't have to just make decisions based on what, you know, your gut tells you. You can make decisions based on information analysis and the kind of work that ISER's done. Number two, you can help be part of the financing mechanism because it isn't free. It isn't free. If you want the kind of work product that ISER has produced for 50 years, it does involve not only support from the legislature, support from private industry, support from individuals. So as we listen a little earlier to the large contributions that have been made recently to UAF, like in the $1 million category. I don't know that there's a $1 million donor in the room tonight, but it's more than, I mean, it doesn't have to be $1 million. It can be a smaller amount, and it will still help ISER help the state of Alaska. And thirdly, the Institute needs to find new, bright research talent, because not everybody at ISER will be there as long as, fortunately, Vic has been able to be. It would be great if everybody could have the energy and intellect that this man has at his age. But the truth is, we need to recruit and find that next generation that will be as outstanding as the researchers that have contributed to ISER over the years. That's why the George Rogers Emerging Scholars Fund, which was referenced a couple of times tonight, is really so wonderful, because it's not just a recognition of our founder, George, and the many things that he did for our state. A sweet, wonderful man who, incidentally, was also a great performer. He did a lot of stage in Juneau. But the idea is really to create fellowships so that the next generation of researchers are supported in getting their additional degrees, doctorate degrees, in being able to do interesting research projects to help ISER help the state. So I just want to ask you to think about the George Rogers Emerging Scholars Fund as one of the ways in which you can help support the university and support the state of Alaska, and really put into the pipeline the opportunity to grow our own emerging scholars through the George Rogers Fund. It's a great opportunity for us to continue the tradition that we are celebrating here tonight.
Thank you. We see that very much as part of, we hope, the legacy of George Rogers, whom Vic described in terms of his major contributions and his role in the founding of ISER. We do need to attract young researchers, future faculty for ISER and for the university. We see this as one model. Can we help support young people to come and do research early in their careers, either pre-doc or post-doc, give them some support to work here and recognize research done by young researchers? We really need that talent to come and grow ISER and grow the university. There are some brochures and envelopes on the tables over there about the George Rogers Fund, and there's also material on our website. Tom, do you have any contributions to thoughts to add?
Once again, I have the bumper sticker, bumper sticker answer, which summarizes the substance of what all my colleagues have said. education, education, and education.
Yes.
Thank you. And Scott gets the last word here.
The challenges that I've heard from the other ISER directors tonight, having to do with managing our assets, having to do with social implications of climate change, having to do with education policy, and so on and so forth. These are big questions, but they're not the kind of questions that where there's a ready group or an institution that's out there that's really seeking answers in a way that starts with really defining the question in the right way. Partly that's because Alaska is such a small state. We seem to only be able to do and concentrate on one problem at a time. It seems like today it's either the gas line or ACEs or road work in the summer. And of course, we're a seasonal place, so in the summer time everybody goes fishing and sort of forgets what happened in the previous winter and has to come back and relearn everything. So that's a challenge. And the other is that these are the kind of questions that people would rather ignore. I mean, nobody wants to think about the fact that you know, there may be another 100,000, 200,000 people knocking on our door in 5 or 10 years because of climate change. But somebody's got to do it. And to my mind, that's where ISER comes in. ISER comes in being able to hopefully define the questions, either set the agenda or try to move the agenda for dialogue in a direction that makes sense, provide information and expertise, then to try to answer those questions.
Thank you, and thank you so much to all of our panel. And
Heather, I would be remiss if I didn't come back to this idea. You also have the opportunity to grow your own. We have a minimal number of master's degree programs. We have limited scholarships for our undergraduate students. We have no doctoral programs. This is shameful for a state of this size, that the campus that is the social science campus in the entire system does not have advanced degree, doctoral degree programs. You can help ISER by helping UAA create essentially our own pipelines for the future researchers of ISER.
All right. Thank you. I think you'll find a lot of support for that idea here among ISER and faculty. I would like to thank everyone, the 250 plus years of wisdom, the 200,000 we each have to figure out what to do with for our future, according to Scott, and everyone who's been here. Now we have an opportunity to toast ISER. We have champagne for you, cider if you would like. And we have cake. We need to celebrate a little bit. So if you'll go and find something to eat and drink, and then we'll have a toast once you have something in your hands. These people will be around. Feel free to follow up with them. Certainly, ISER faculty, other ISER faculty are sprinkled throughout the room, as well as our researchers. Feel free to engage with them. Tell them what you think. Tell them what you'd like us to do. That's what we'd like to know from you. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and let's celebrate.
It was fun. It is good to hear that from somebody else.